Hello and welcome to the Art of Costume Podcast. I'm Elizabeth Joy Glass.
And I'm the Reverend Mother, Spencer Williams.
Hello, Reverend Mother.
Hello, costume nerds. We're very excited. This is a big episode for us because if you remember, we've been talking about this episode since, I believe, March of this year. We've been trying to make it happen. As we talked about Dune Part Two earlier this year, and we had to work it out on the remix because today we have a special guest with us that we have a ton of questions for. So we are talking, of course, about Dune Part Two with costume designer Jacqueline West.
I'm so excited. Dune is one of the most extraordinary film series to come out in a while, I feel like.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just me being really excited for both of these. But it's just, they're so immersive. That takes so much work and effort and coordination. So yeah, just like a million questions. And today, Spencer, what happened?
We finally got Jacqueline West in the studio with us. It's been a long time coming, but you know, Oscar season is around the corner. So now's the time to shine. We're very excited to have her here. But before we get into it, we have to get through some of our typical business. So why don't I start us off with a summary, Elizabeth, if any of you somehow forgot one of the greatest films of the past decade. Dune Part 2 explores the mythic journey of Paul Atreides as he unites with Chani and the Fremen while on a path of revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the known universe, he endeavors to prevent a terrible future only he can foresee. And that is Dune Part 2.
Dune Part 2. If you have not seen it, get on it.
It's on Max. I watched it last night for the 100th time, and I will be getting it on Blu-ray.
Let's just go behind the costumes and reacquaint ourselves with director Denis Villeneuve and costume designer Jacqueline West. You will know her work from Quills, for which she got an Oscar nomination, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, for which she got an Oscar nomination, The Social Network, Argo, The Revenant, another Oscar nomination, Killers of the Flower Moon, Oscar nomination, and Dune Part 1, for which she got an Oscar nomination and won a Costume Designer Guild Award.
Which leads me to the point I want to make. I really think that not only should Jacqueline West be nominated for Dune Part 2, I think it's time the Academy does what is right and presents this incredible designer with an actual Oscar win. That's neither here nor there. I'm not a part of the Academy, but that is my little standing on a soapbox campaign moment. If, you know, elections have not been going my way lately, so if you could give me this one.
We'd love it.
Dune Part 2. Elizabeth, our special guest is here. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be with the one, the only costume designer, Jacqueline West.
Hi, I'm Dan, who does all the magic behind the scenes. I wanted to say thank you, and if you want to support the show even farther, go to tpublic.com/user/theartofcostume, where you can buy a couple variations of our logo on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. Also, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and if you're an audio listener, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. Now, back to the show.
I am so excited to welcome back to the Art of Costume podcast now for the second time our dear friend, costume designer Jacqueline West. Hey, Jackie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
We're doing so good. We've been waiting for all year now to talk to you. We've just been so excited. And starting from the beginning, since this is the first time we've kind of talked to you about Dune, you know, Dune is a massive universe. We have the many novels by Frank Herbert, of course. which led to the Jodorowsky film that never was, the 1984 film by David Lynch, a miniseries, so on and so forth. So when it comes to starting Dune, you're no stranger to epic films. Probably before Dune, I would say maybe the last one would have been The Revenant. So what were your thoughts about Dune? Because this is such a massive universe. I have to imagine you were a little, ready to go, but probably a little nervous too.
Well, I remember when Denis first asked me to do Dune, I said, "Oh, I would love to, but I don't do sci-fi."
Uh-oh.
And he said, "That's why I want you, Jacqueline." That I want this to be grounded in reality and not urban cool. He said, "I want it to be a timeless kind of masterpiece that people won't forget." And he said, I love your work. He was a fan of The Revenant. And he said, "I love how grounded you make everything." So, Mary Perrin got involved, and pretty soon I was talked into it and then loved every minute ever after.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a natural collaboration, honestly.
Well, I had seen Denis' movies, and I, of course, was a fan of his work. But Dune was a huge stretch for me. I thought I had never made specialty costumes except many years ago on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And very few, just I got my feet wet, but I hadn't really created whole worlds, whole, Duneverses of armies. And it was a real learning curve for me, which had to be expanded. That knowledge had to be expanded on for Dune Part Two, because all the worlds became expanded. A little bit of the Harkonnen world in Dune 1, we really went into it in Dune 2 and created a whole, gladiator arena and army, almost like, I based them on the Romans, and it was a real undertaking. And then I had to, expand on the whole still suit theme and create an underworld of the Siege for the Fremen, and what their whole cave-like world looked like inside, and what those clothings, entailed and were. Yeah. Then I had to, create the Emperor's whole world and the world we find Irulan in, and then expand on all the Bene Gesserits that you have up here behind Austin Butler and Timothy as they do their fight. All those ancient Bene Gesserits were quite an undertaking. So it was really just an expansion of Dune 1, Dune 2, but Dune 1 was so informative on how I would go about doing that on Dune 2. So Dune 1 was school, and Dune 2 was university.
That's an understatement.
Oh, it definitely is. And your collaboration with Denis Villeneuve is just so extraordinary, and he's such a brilliant director. Can you talk a little bit more about your collaboration and getting this massive Dune world to look so wonderful?
Well, Denis, he really feels the spirit of the novel, and he really follows it like no one has. I think if Frank Herbert were alive, he would be so pleased with how Denis has created the world that he wrote about. He's loved this book since he was 12. And I really feel that he's so articulate describing how he sees things. And what Denis doesn't like is as informative as the things he loves. And when I show him something and I don't hear, "I deeply love it, Jacqueline," I keep working on it until I have it, because he has a gut reaction to things. And sometimes he can't describe what he wants, but he knows when he sees it. And so often I'll create whole mise-en-scenes in my wardrobe. Like I have like a huge, like an airplane hangar we use for wardrobe. It's huge buildings. And I'll even have my concept artist like paint a wall behind it so we can get the feeling of how people will look in the desert, or how the Bene Gesserits will look coming off a highliner. And I'll use wind machines and dress the mannequins and really create a whole world for him. And he'll say, I love that, oh yes, that, no, not that, but that. And it's so exciting when he comes through. He comes through about every 2 days, and I try to have new stuff to show him because it's so massive.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember doing a whole huge lineup of all the Fremen in their robes, and all the Arakians in their robes, and all the water masters sitting around a pool outside, with their kind of African style masks. And it lets him kind of see what the scenes are going to look like when we do get to the desert. But yeah, we work very, very closely. And I absolutely love working with him. And he often brings me ideas. I'm not furnishing him with ideas only for him to say yay or nay, but like for the picadors in the gladiator scene, he brought me this little tiny stick drawing. It's like, something, just a stick man drawing, but with this big arch of a black hat. And we made him. From
That's
that
crazy.
Little picture came the picadors. So just a little quick sketch he'd done, it's so much fun working with him. I think we both kind of thrill each other with ideas.
That's incredible. And you said earlier that he wanted you because he wanted this film grounded in realism. And we've discussed on the podcast your love of research. So while Dune takes place in a very distant future, the story and the people are relatable, especially the Fremen. So what did your research and like the cornerstones of that research really look like?
Well, when I read Frank Herbert's interviews long ago, he said to understand the distant future, you had to look at the far past. And so I kind of looked at different cultures. I think for a lot of Dune, I used a lot of medieval references. For the Fremen and the Arakians, I looked at desert peoples. I didn't base it on any one tribe, but I looked at Tuaregs and Bedouins, and I looked at a lot of Middle Eastern desert tribes, Turkish tribes. And for one, the Tuareg, they use the same dye vats to dye their robes in Morocco in the Gemma El Fana that they've used for 800 years.
Wow.
So when you watch the Tuareg ride the salt trails on camels to this day and cook in the sand, they have learned how to live in their environment successfully and how to use their environment and how to not be at war with it like we are. And they were a definite inspiration with all the head wraps and the flowing robes and the way they'll wrap their faces to keep out the desert sand when it blows. That was all inspiring for me. And then I use these wonderful French books called The Orientalists that are based, on all the Middle Eastern tribes, really age-old paintings of what the people look like back in time to create all of that. And the still suit was, really described quite in detail by Frank Herbert. So that became, a challenge to get all of that right. So it really did look like it was a distillery recycling human waste liquids into potable liquid.
Well, we're excited to dive into part 2 and some of the transitions some of these characters saw, some of them more subtle than others. In the second film, Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides, a.k.a. Muad'Dib, a.k.a. the Lisan al Gaib, goes on a journey into the depths of Arrakis, becoming one with the Fremen. So what changes, if any, were made to Paul's costume in his second film to sort of show that transition? In our podcast we did earlier this year, Elizabeth and I talked about how we felt like Paul slowly became Darth Vader almost with his hood, even though it was so subtle. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on his costume.
Well, I felt that the Fremen used their robes over their still suits to shapeshift a bit the desert, to shift their shapes shift like sand in the desert. And it gave them a more romantic quality than just a lot of still suits running around. It gave them movement in the wind and when they climbed. And so the cloak became kind of a signature in part one, but I expanded on it in part two. And the top left picture of him, you're right, he has almost but he's also majestic as he's taking on the role of a leader. He becomes from a boy, in a almost superhero suit, the still suit, he transitions into a man with some gravity in those capes and cloaks and hoods, and he looks like a leader. If you go back to, I based a lot of this on ancient warriors like the Templars, and they wore robes over their armor, and it gave them such majesty and such weight and depth. And I wanted that for Timothy. And also it makes him more powerful. His whole shape changes.
It was very subtle, but just like the small alterations to his shape just really made this really brand new kind of fearsome leader. But you could still see, Paul in there somewhere.
Yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give him a leadership quality by adding, girth to him, because he's quite slender. And when we first meet him, he's boyish. And by the end of Dune 2, he's a man.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved in the second film were the crowd scenes. Specifically, there is a lot of large crowd scenes in the realm of the Southern Fremen. Your level of detail just does not decrease despite adding so many more characters. How did you make these scenes possible?
Well, I had a brilliant, brilliant textile collaborator on both Dunes, but on the second one, he really outdid himself. His name is Matt Reima. He's American, but he lives in London, in England, and he's absolutely brilliant. And we went to Italy for a lot of our fabrics, so that they're just so wonderful at hand woven and beautifully textured linens and cottons and natural fabrics. And I thought that they would use natural fabrics. Natural fabrics have a wonderful way of wrinkling that unnatural fabrics don't. And I thought that it would give them a beautiful organic feeling by using all these fabrics. But I knew to give any kind of depth of field for these big crowd scenes, it had to be many colors. But I chose a rather narrow palette with Matt, and we dyed. You should have seen, it was so beautiful in Budapest at Origo. We'd have racks, lines and lines and lines of this fabric being dyed in subtly different colors, and all hanging and blowing in the wind. And it was like some magical planet in itself. Then he would print it all. He developed many prints, a lot of them with Chicopsa, the language of the Fremen, the writing, and would print the fabrics. Or he would come up with, we would work on, from the book, The Orientalists, there was a lot of, Arabic writing, and from all the different tribes, they all had their own language and their own alphabets. And he would create incredible designs. And then after everything was dyed, there'd be an acre of young Hungarian artists from art schools, all hand silk screening all the fabrics into different designs.
Oh my goodness.
So all the fabrics are all printed. I told Mary Parent that they should do a Dune home collection.
Oh, please.
They're just so beautiful, the designs he came up with. And you see him sometimes close up on Lady Jessica. When you get close up on some of the people, you see these designs, and they're just thrilling. He's a genius.
Well, speaking of Lady Jessica, we got to talk about Lady Jessica as in part two, she becomes the Reverend Mother after a long, healthy drink of the water of life, and her transition is anything less than subtle. She goes from Paul's mom to, the Reverend Mother, and her costumes have always been extravagant, but they definitely make a transition in part two. So I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about that character arc we see play out in part 2.
Well, you kind of just described it. I mean, she's a mom at first, but never a humble mom. Her
Right.
quite posh in part 1.
Right.
She's the Duke Atreides, wife, but definitely his consort. And she's quite rich and wealthy, and then moves to the desert. And so she dons a still suit and some desert robes to navigate the sands. And when she gets to the siege and drinks the water of life, then you see a transition of her from something more worldly to almost otherworldly. Mm-hmm. And I wanted her to be almost a little ghost-like. And yet, if you look at this, it looks like a lot of religious paintings. The bottom left one was inspired, of course, by Giotto and the virtues and the vices of Giotto in Padua. And then the one where she's headed for her seat on the sandworm for traveling to the south. She's again almost biblical. You think she'd be on the road with Moses, and then when she finally lands and she becomes the head Reverend Mother, she gets quite ornate and very plush again, and that costume is very, very ornate and very luxurious. Yeah. No longer is she in the humble cottons and linens of the siege.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Also, talking about someone who has a lot of luxury, Princess Irulan, played by wonderful Florence Pugh.
Yeah, she's fabulous to work with, and she's a princess. She had to be all about being the daughter of the emperor, but still a Bene Gesserit. So I had to keep some elements of Bene Gesseritness on her, like her headdress in the bottom is a second generation of the beaded veil that Mother Mohayim wears. Mm. And that was definitely taken from medieval paintings. And her medal was taken from medieval armor. And I just feminized it.
We love this last piece. It has so much feeling in it. And it definitely she's there to fight beside her father, but also it's so delicate at the same time. What kind of balance were you trying to get with this piece?
Just what you described. I wanted to keep her beautiful and feminine and show her body and her femininity, but I wanted her to be a warrior princess. And I also wanted to keep that medieval feeling, of medieval armor going as a warrior princess. But I also wanted to continue with the whole nun-like feeling that I got from the tarot cards, the Marseille Tarot, by keeping this certain shape of a nun's headdress for her throughout, to remind people that though she's a warrior princess, she's a Bene Gesserit.
Then moving on to the Harkonnens. Regarding their overall aesthetic, we have seen your previous interviews where you talk about the goth approach, maybe a little vampire and insect-like. You also have used some interesting materials in that approach. Please tell us everything, because I love how much more we get to see of them in part 2.
Well, I have an interesting story you'll probably love.
Ooh.
Part 2, Gedi Prime was shot very much in infrared photography. Little did I know that depending on the fabric or the material that you use to make these costumes, some, though they're black to the eye, when they're shot with infrared, they become white.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Which is insane.
I had costumes for Feyd-Rautha that looked like a checkerboard, and had to go back and remake them all and camera test with Greg every single fabrication I used. Wow. And for everybody in that gladiator scene. It was quite a learning curve for me. I had no idea, but They're everything. They're like a Third Reich rally. They're like the evilest iteration of the Nazis. They're gothic, they're dark, they're evil. And it's so hard to portray without getting cliche. And you have to put a lot of thought and give the different characters really different looks to separate them in all their different levels of evil.
Yeah. They're very ghoul-like, vampire-like, but I actually want to return to the gladiator scene for a moment. It's one of my favorite scenes of any film, I think, in the past couple of years. I'm a big fan. The moment where you see the Bene Gesserits kind of walk out and they're, you could see the essence of color just sort of fade away. I mean, just take me back to the moment where you put your first costume on camera and it was, it was white or whatnot. It wasn't what you thought it would originally be. I'm just really fascinated with this scene and how it came together. It's quite the feat.
First of all, it was a delight dressing Austin. He's wonderful to work with and has a perfect body. And he just, I had a wonderful, wonderful effects costume maker making his every, cutting and making every piece of his costume for that scene. Yeah. And he was just wonderful. All of David Bethel's team are incredible effects costume fabricators. But this one guy he had working, I think his name's, it's John Negrosian, I think. He created this whole costume with me for Feyd-Rautha, and I think it was so beautiful. We did have to remake pieces of it that went white when we camera tested it. It has a definite gladiator feeling, but it's, and Roman, we used a lot of Roman research, but it also has an incredible Gothic feeling and a very modern feeling. Yeah. So a lot went into that.
When I saw the picadors, I think I was with another costume designer and we were both like, what is that? It is so shockingly terrifying, but so interesting. And I could see how it came from a, stick figure illustration as well. It adds to the creepiness. And I also want to dive into Feyd-Rautha a little bit. He's obviously insane, but the fans love him, actually, probably way more than we should. Looking at your research, you've obviously there's the Harkonnen family resemblance, and a lot of the Harkonnens could, look the same physically. But Feyd-Rautha has his own style, and I've seen in the past that you've kind of addressed the H.R. Giger inspiration a little bit, which I'm a big Giger fan as well. So I'm curious to dive into that individual style that makes Feyd-Rautha a little bit more of a rock star to me, honestly, compared to the others.
Well, I did that on purpose, just because of the rock stars that have played that character.
Well, yeah, that too.
Jagger was going to do the Jodorowsky, and Sting, did the David Lynch. It was interesting that Elvis got this part.
Yeah, that's so true. I didn't think of that.
A friend of mine used to make, she's British actually, used to make all of Mick Jagger's clothes. And when I go, she lived in New York, and her name was Marcia Trinder. And her dad was the mayor of London, but she expatriated to New York. And she lived in the Dakota. No, she lived in the one next door to the Dakota. And Mick Jagger would come over for fittings when I was visiting her. She was an old friend of mine.
What?
And when he would walk in the room, I would, he had such a swagger. I thought, wow, how much fun to dress him. And when Austin walked into the room, he walked just like Mick Jagger.
This is your chance.
I thought, okay, this guy has to be a rock star. So I'm glad you felt that I accomplished that.
Yeah, it's so fun. You could just tell that, he's even surrounded by all the other ladies as well, though he's, I wouldn't say he's much of a lady charmer either, but you could see that rock star quality in the psychopath.
Definitely had it. And so that definitely informed his costume.
I want to take a second and talk about one of my favorite characters from the book, Lady Fenrig. I was so excited to see her in part 2, despite her very brief appearance. She makes such a huge visual impact. So how did you approach her character, and what were your inspirations knowing she had such a limited time on screen, but such a big role?
Yeah, made the shots count.
First of all, I wanted to keep her a Bene Gesserit because she's their pawn, right? And so I wanted to keep that shape, but she's Lady Fenring, so she needed to be luxurious. And so I started something, and also Leia is French, and I wanted to keep some kind of haute couture feeling about her. And so I looked to Balenciaga in the 30s and the 40s and came up with all her looks. They're very Balenciaga inspired.
Yeah,
yes.
I could see that. She's just very charming, and I just feel like she takes that moment and runs with it.
Yes.
I tell you, Balenciaga's inspirations were from Goya and a lot of the Mahas. So that's why she has that almost religious feeling, but yet she's cunning, and I wanted to make her like a dark Goya-esque. I used Goya and Balenciaga for her, but Balenciaga's designs were very much influenced by Goya.
That's incredible. I love that. Another huge part of Dune is how technology is integrated into their clothing, with the shields, the still suits, the hover tech. How did you represent this, and what other departments did you have to collaborate with to get these so wonderfully perfect in how they're represented?
That's engineering.
Well, the still suit was all left to me. And as I said, I had a wonderful sketch artist, Keith Christensen, who did the first drawing, and he based it as much as he could on us talking about Frank Herbert's descriptions of the still suit. Like, he said that, the pipes were, that the boots had a pumping action as you walked through the dunes, and your heel lifted and landed in the heel of the boot, that it created a pumping action which automated the circulation of the fluids through the still suit. So we knew that there had to be tubing and piping, and it had to all look like a distillery. And some of those elements had to be on the outside so that you could see. Else it wouldn't matter. If it was all underneath, you wouldn't see that it was this working distillery that absorbed all your sweat, your urine, whatever your bodily fluids were, your saliva, and reconstituted it into drinking water by this magical Fremen technology that they'd been using for hundreds of years to survive in the desert. So all that had to show. And so that was all left to us. Those were all created in our workshop. The flying things, that was probably a CGI element, but those costumes had to look like they had sensors on them and suspensors that would lift the body up. So part of that was props and part of it was me, depending how it was attached to the costume. But it was definitely a merger between the art department and costumes, all of these technical costumes.
It's incredible the way that it just represents so much innovative technology, even though it's a costume. But we received a few audience questions, actually, and I thought they're actually quite interesting. Alex McFarlane on Instagram asked, you've worked on a lot of different dramas and epic films. Is your approach different when it comes to sci-fi versus a drama or fantasy, or do you feel like it's a lot of the same in different worlds?
It's a different mindset, definitely, but my process is the same. I try to be really character oriented. I try to read the script 6 or 7 times before I ever start and really get to know the character. And my husband said, it doesn't matter. Once he said, I said, I'm a fashion designer. How am I going to do Henry and June? And he said, you're an art historian. You're not just a fashion designer. I said, I'm a thoroughly modern Millie. And he said, listen, he said, you have good taste. And he said, what you do is you just find the character and then take them shopping in whatever period that you're doing. And they'll pick their own clothes. And I've always lived by that.
Yeah, I'm sure every young costume designer listening to this just wrote that down in their journal so hard. It's such a great quote. And finally, Robert J.C. Pugh on Instagram asked, what was one of the more satisfying moments of designing the Dune films? Was there a moment where maybe you saw something and you're like, wow, that was cool. We did that.
I think it's when all the Bene Gesserit, ancient Bene Gesserits lined up for the battle between Feyd-Rautha. And I just love those costumes so much. They were like mummy cases, you know. I just love those costumes. And when they all lined up alongside of Lady Jessica behind that fight, I went, okay, that was worth all that work.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And, you know, you talked a little bit about that too, that you were very inspired by nuns and whatnot, right? I believe you have a history with nuns as well. So that kind of added to it.
I went to Catholic school. So, you know, you really watch them, what they do with their hands, how they hide their hands in their robes, you know, how they move when they walk. They were ghost-like to me as a kid, you know, little kid in Catholic school. And I was fascinated by them, by everything that their clothes were hiding. You know, did they have hair under their veils? Or, you know? And I know other designers, Yohji Yamamoto was very inspired by nuns and in the 80s, but I used a lot of religious paintings and different nuns. I've always loved the French nuns, and they're different, you know, different countries. And then there's also that crossover into Middle Eastern dress, which is very similar. It was something about it was fascinating to separate them all, but use similar inspirations.
It's like you said, it's really beautiful to see it all come together. And, you know, now that we've seen Dune 1, part 1 and part 2, I'm very hoping that we get to see you do another one in the future. I'll cross my fingers. What has this entire journey meant to you, Jacqueline?
Well, it's taught me that I can do sci-fi.
Well, I think that's an understatement, but whatever.
No, it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. And just getting to know Denis and Tanya and Mary Parent. And, you know, I've worked with Greg before, but it was such a wonderful team and a great group of actors. And it was just a marvelous experience that I'm going to always have with me, but also looking forward to doing Dune 3. So I hope it's as gratifying for you all as 1 and 2 were.
I imagine it will be.
We're on the edge of our seats. Yeah, I can't even tell you. Costume designer Jacqueline West, thank you so much for doing this. We've been so excited to talk with you, and your work is beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a joy.
Thank you.
You guys are all great, and have a nice weekend.
I feel like our questions got answered and then some.
That was so much fun. Actually, we had even more questions, but we had to cut some for time, honestly. But I think we got most of it in there. I think Jacqueline is just so incredible. She's the sweetest, and just I love her knack for research. You could tell that she really loves the process of understanding all the cultures and
really has enthusiasm for it. Is just so excited.
Like she said at the beginning, like Denis Villeneuve was like, yeah, this might be a futuristic film, but this is something that's really grounded in reality and help build this world. And it's not looking at the Blade Runners and Trons and whatnot. This is very much like looking back to the past to understand what motivates this future. And I just think that's quite beautiful.
Absolutely. Now, Spencer, earlier this year, when we talked about Dune Part 2, we lacked a stitch rating system.
Ooh, it had not been created yet.
What is your stitch rating of Dune Part 2?
I wholeheartedly stand behind giving this a full 5-stitch rating. On my Letterboxd account, this is also one of the only films I've given 5 stars to. So I have to do what's right and stand by that. I think it's a near perfect film. I think it's great. I think they took this really beautiful story. I think they did it right, especially seeing like how the story's been represented in the past. Trying to combine things into one film absolutely does not work.
No.
The book is huge. And just, seeing how they were able to take that first film, which I also think is a near perfect film, and really grow upon it and show all these different cultures. And, now we get to go to Getty Prime and check out how the Harkonnens live, which is hashtag not good. The gladiator scene, which I think is just like such a feat of modern technology and cinema, and seeing that, I don't even know what you call it now. I'm blanking out, but like that really special IMAX screen at Universal Studios with the 70 millimeter film, which was incredible, blown away. I saw it of Tracy Field and we were both like, we walked off our eyes so huge. It has so much to it that's just so truly epic. And I don't know that as many films really hit that level of epicness than Dune Part 2. And the costumes are perfect. No notes.
Yeah, I have to concur, give it a 5-stitch rating. It really is perfect. And like you said, it just does such justice to the book, especially this second one. The first one, there were definitely things from the book that I wish they'd left in, or like maybe just changed how they approached it a little bit. But Part 2, where they made some even bigger changes, like instead of doing a time jump, they just compressed the timeline.
Yeah.
The changes they made to Chaney's character just really worked perfectly. And it was just visually stunning. Like you said, a feat of modern technology and modern cinema. And Jacqueline West costumes, just scene to scene, brought it to life and really visually helped tell that story and keep it together. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stitches.
Yeah.
So we don't often get to go back to a movie we've already reviewed on this show. So I have to ask you, what is your one costume to rule them all?
All right, let's hit it.
The one costume to rule them all.
I don't know. I'm still a Feyd-Rautha fan. I don't know that the gladiator costume is specifically, but the whole idea that there's a lingering Mick Jagger inspiration and also being played by Elvis, I can't quit the rock star. That's still my favorite. My one costume ruled them all because it's just that much cooler. If anything, she just made me double down on my choice from April.
I love that.
I didn't even think of the fact that like Elvis is playing Feyd-Rautha, because Sting actually played this character in the 84 film.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect little transition. What about you? Last time you picked Paul Atreides, quote unquote Darth Vader look.
Honestly, like I still really love it, but I think I now have to go with Lady Fenring.
Ooh, we have a change.
I do love her as a character. The book, the movie, she's about she's in the book the same amount she is in the movie. Like, talk about a perfect adaptation of a character.
Right.
It's her. And her talking about the inspiration behind it, and even just more like the Bene Gesserit and how she really carries like from like the ancient like Bene Gesserits, like their like kind of nun-like appearance. And kind of like with the older Bene Gesserits, you're like, okay, this is like the uniform of a Bene Gesserit. And then how she translates that through all of the younger Bene Gesserit characters, especially with Lady Fenring, I think is brilliant. Mm-hmm. So I gotta change it.
So good. I felt that under the surface too. I was like, that's such a good one. This was such a fun episode. And if anyone else would like to let us know what they thought about it, please email us at theartofcostume@gmail.com. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, where we post these episodes with all of our images as well. Kind of an update on that, Elizabeth. We kind of teased some breaking news earlier. This might be a good time to share with the audience. Something that will impact this podcast going forward, starting in the new year.
It will, especially our YouTube channel, because I am moving back to the West Coast.
Woo!
So me and Spencer will now be doing podcast episodes in person. And we will also be creating the official Art of Costume studio.
Yeah. So that's something to look forward to. Something else to look forward to is our next episode. We're going to be talking about Gladiator 2 with two special guests who were also on the podcast last year, costume designer Janty Yates and military costume designer David Crossman. It's not out yet as this episode comes out, but I have seen the film, and Elizabeth, let me tell you, it is spectacular. It's so much fun.
I can't
Pedro
wait.
Pascal is
my favorite.
Yeah, he's great. And so is Paul Mescal. Literally everyone's great in this film. It's so much fun. The costumes are sick.
Oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait.
This has been so much fun. I can't wait to talk about Gladiator, and I can't wait for you to be out here. We have some good stuff coming up for the rest of this year and going into 2025. We're not going anywhere. So
everybody, keep your ears open for what's next at the Art of Costume.
Oh, yeah.